already planning an assault to take down the GOP ticket and to elect Barack Obama as president. Jamie Weinstein is deputy editor of The Daily Caller. He is back here on America Live with brand new information. Jamie, thank you so much for being here. This is so for our viewers who are not familiar, this is part of your ongoing investigation into this group called Journolist, which is an online group of so-called journalists, pundits, opinion makers, supposedly straight news reporters as well, who leaned left and were talking about politics. And in some cases, you have now uncovered conspiring in their coverage, in particular, to detract from the McCain-Palin ticket.
Right, exactly. Journolist was a listserv of about 400 journalists, academics, think tankers, who, if it was just a listserv, that's fine. But there seems to be evidence that they were trying to shape the media debate. And in the current story we have up right now is what they were discussing after Palin was picked by John McCain as the running mate. And as soon as it happened, they started to strategize what to say exactly about Sarah Palin. One person chimed in and said, we should say this is sexist, typical GOP tokenism. And I think one of the most telling things was Daniel Levy, who is a Middle East advisor or a Middle East expert, said, this is the time for the non-official campaign to jump in. And I think by non-official campaign, he was referring to those on the list, these journalists, to try to shape the debate over Palin. And
right.
One of the things he said... Go ahead.
And you see, there's a couple of things that I want to go through with you. Can we turn the music down? It's pretty as it is. I want to hear the guest. Thank you. You see sort of the elitism from the media that we have seen so often when it comes to Sarah Palin, and that we saw, frankly, it did manifest in the coverage. For example, Jeffrey Toobin of CNN and The New Yorker said, and I quote, upon hearing it was Palin as the pick, "What a joke. I always thought that some part of McCain didn't want to be president, and this choice proves my point. Welcome back, Admiral Stockdale." Clearly a criticism of Ross Perot's old running mate when he made his bid for president. And then, but the thing that's interesting to me is that then they go beyond just criticizing Palin, not that shocking, quite frankly, to strategizing about how to hurt the ticket. This is an example from a guy named Ed Kilgore, who's a Democratic strategist blogger. And he writes, the criticism of her, meaning Palin, really needs to be ideological, not just about experience. If we concede she's a maverick, we will have done John McCain an enormous service. And they go on from there, and it's not just bloggers and pundits. It is so-called straight news journalists.
Exactly. And if you look at the end of the article, you see the culmination of this. Joe Klein, who writes for a publication that's supposed not to be partisan at all, Time magazine, writes at the end something to the effect of, hey guys, take a look at my latest post at Time magazine. This is the culmination of what this august listserv has been talking about. So, I mean, right there you have someone admitting that he's been influenced by what was being discussed on this listserv.
Yeah, which of course he doesn't disclose in his pieces. You mentioned this attempt to talk about whether the pick was sexist. I mean, basically, the moment he introduces her, already these left-wing journalists are conspiring about how can we describe the pick itself as sexist. Putting the first female Republican nominee for vice president ever. They want to spin it to say it's a sexist pick. And there's this guy, Jonathan Stein from Mother Jones, who writes, that's excellent, he writes. If enough people on this list write that the pick is sexist, you'll have the networks debating it for days. And that negates the single thing Palin brings to the ticket. So it's one thing, Jamie, you tell me, to have somebody from Mother Jones magazine, and you know what you're getting when you buy Mother Jones, to be saying that. But there's input, there's exchange between folks like this and regular reporters who were supposed to be covering this race in an objective way.
Right. It's not so much that it's just a listserv of these influential people who are, posting their articles for people to look at. There seems to be some coordination. And as I said, Daniel Levy, who was on the listserv and in this discussion, this think tanker on the Middle East, seemed to think that this group could be considered the non-official campaign. That's just not really appropriate when you're talking about journalists.
Yeah, it was saying that they could say the things that the official campaign couldn't say, that they could get some of the worst rhetoric out there. One of the journalists who was supposed to be a straight news reporter was Ben Adler, who was then at Politico and is now at Newsweek. And he and a couple of others who were supposed to be straight journalists brought up the topic of Sarah Palin's son, who has Down syndrome, and talked about how that was going to play. And he raises the point, this is a quote, well, doesn't leaving that, it seems like he meant to say said baby, but he wrote sad, doesn't leaving said baby without its mother while she campaigns weaken the family values argument, or will everyone be too afraid to make the point? He is fretting over whether people will be reluctant to criticize her for being a bad mother while she's out on the campaign trail.
Right, and I don't think they would make that criticism if it was, a man running who had a Down syndrome baby. I think that's pretty unfair, especially when her husband, he took care of the family when she was campaigning and things like that. So I don't think that was, that itself could be sexist.
What, I got to go, but I want to ask you quickly, what has Sarah Palin said about this? Because she just spoke to you.
Right. She spoke to our reporter Jonathan Strong, who reported this, and she says this is just more evidence that there's this campaign against me. That's something that she felt from the very beginning, and it just shows that they were out to get her from the very start.
Yeah, you can understand her feelings, having read some of those emails. Jamie, you guys have been doing an interesting work over there at the Daily Caller. Good job. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Fox News alert from our